Thanks for coming back, everyone. In this video, I'm going to be showing you the top center candy. The difference between the top center candy and the bottom center candy is color placement and the direction of the stripes in the candy. Today I'm working on the top center candy, and the finished section or the finished unit is on page 24 of the pattern booklet. I've also got page 33, which is a picture of the finished table runner or banner, and it is the final assembly. I'm comparing the top center candy and the top center candy here to make sure that the color placement is the same as this. After I've compared my top center candy to the picture on page 33, what I did was I referred to page 6 of the pattern booklet, which is the top center candy. Then I went ahead and just on plain printer paper, I made a copy of page 6, and I made sure that it was at 100%. And it was the exact size of this page. For color placement, I took my printed copy and I used it to determine my color placement. So I compared these two right here. Now you can see if it's in opposite directions, that means it's correct. Our fabrics are going to be sewn on the wrong side. So when I turn this over, and I'm going to turn my light box on, and if you don't have a light box, that's fine. You can just use any kind of a light source in behind to check this out. So now when I check this out and I compare the two, I can see where the diagram, this is the finished, what it's going to look like when it's finished. So I can see where G is over here, H is over here, and these colors are now going in the same direction that they should be going. So now on this side is my unprinted side. So what I did was I looked at G section to determine that G1 is going to be pink. And when I compared H, turned it over, and H1 is going to be pink. So the next sections, when I compared them, F1 is actually over here. If you can see that. So F1 is going to be green, and F2 is going to be pink, F3 green, F4 pink, F5 is green, F6 is pink, 7 is green, 8 is pink, and 10 is pink. Everything else is going to be white. What I need now is a copy to print out to cut out my pattern. I'll be cutting up my pattern to get pattern pieces to cut out my fabrics. So what I did was I took this to my printer and I printed out a copy on freezer paper, and then what I did was I cut out my pieces following the instructions that I've given you in the previous video. My stitching pattern, I ran out of freezer paper and all I had was scraps left. So what I did was I laid my scraps of freezer paper, because that's what I'm using, I laid them over top of my pattern, and I had to draw out each of the sections. I could have just used copy paper or whatever other kind of paper you're using to get your piecing patterns. So I traced those all out and labeled them and just colored them in roughly with the corresponding colors. I've got my stitching patterns already here and they're all labeled. So I'm going to fold along all my stitching lines on all of my pattern pieces. I'm going to be now stitching this together. So I'm going to keep my top center candy page 6 and my page 24 close by, just so I can refer to anything if I need to. So I'm going to set this piece off to the side. I have my fabric cut out. I have my stitching pattern all folded along the stitching lines. So I'm now going to start out with, we'll start out with section G. For G, what I'm going to do is take my G section, so I have all my pieces in the order that they're going to be stitched on. Now, one thing I want to tell you is, because I ran out of freezer paper and because I had to trace this out with pencil, I would suggest that you're careful and you clean your iron in between pressing, because sometimes I've found that on white fabric the pencil will transfer onto your white fabrics. So I'm going to be careful when I start my pressing. I'm going to now take my G1 section and I'm going to place that in behind. So I'm going to take that and press that on. Remember, it's right side of the fabric up. I'll give that a light press. And I'm going to now fold along between the line between G1 and G2. I'm using the add a quarter ruler and trim that off. And now I'm going to take G2 and place it in behind, and I will place that right sides together. And now I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch from the edge all the way along there. I've stitched along the edge of my freezer paper between 1 and 2. Place it into the finished position here. Remove my little pattern piece. Put it back on there. And now with my water brush again, I'm going to run that along my stitching line, and I'm going to finger press into the finished position and press with the iron. I had to use a pencil to mark my lines. I don't want any of that pencil to transfer onto my iron. When I'm working on this side, it's fine. But now I'm going to take that to the iron, and just off to the side here, I have just a microfiber cloth that I've just wet, and I will clean my iron off just to make sure that I don't have any of that pencil that transfers onto the iron. Turn it over and press it from the paper side. So now I'm going to fold between, on number 3, which is my next section. G4 is up here, so we want to go to G3. So I'm going to take that, fold between G1 and G3, right along that fold line. I'll trim off my edge. And now I'm going to see where G3 goes. So I'll put it like so. Turn this over and place my piece on. I'm going to do a double check here, just from this side. And when I fold that into the finished position, it should make sure that it covers that section. From this side, I'm going to again fold it back there. I have my cut edges lined up, and now I'm just going to stitch along the folded edge of the paper between number 1 and number 3. I've stitched between 1 and 3. Fold that back, flip it over, remove my pattern piece, and place that back on. I'm going to take my water brush, finger press, take it to the iron, press from the right side here, flip it over, and press from the printed side. And now remember, I'm going to just run my iron across that just so I don't transfer any of that pencil. Okay, that's into position. Now we're going to be working on G4. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to find my G4. I'm going to fold along between the line between G2 and G4. And I'll trim away. Making sure I'm folded on that edge between 2 and 4. Right side of the fabric up and place my pieces together. Make sure my edges are lined up with my pattern piece. And I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and stitch along that folded edge of the freezer paper. I've stitched on the line between 2 and 4. Flip it over. I'll remove my pattern piece and place it back onto my printed paper here. Fold everything into this position and then go ahead with my water brush again. Take that to the iron, press it from the paper side, okay, so the next piece, and I know which it is because it's number 5 here. If I forget, I can just look at my pattern piece and I know where I'm supposed to be going. So I need to fold along the line between G3 and G5. Whoops. G3 and G5. Make sure you're folding along that stitching line. But I'm just going to press that along there and make sure it's folded right along that line. Take my G5 and it's going this way. So I'm going to place it right side of the fabric up, place this over top and line up my edges and take it to the sewing machine. Stitching right along the folded edge of the paper. I've stitched along the line between G3 and G5. Take my pattern piece off. Finger press. And then press with the iron from both sides. And now I'm going to fold along the line between G4 and G6, making sure I'm folding it right along that line. Trim down to 1/4 of an inch. Fold that back and put this underneath so I can see where my G6 is going to go. Flip it to the right side, put my pattern fabric pieces together, and again stitch along that folded edge of the freezer paper. I've stitched along the folded edge between 4 and 6. Turn it into the finished position. Remove my pattern piece. And carry on. Make sure I clean my iron off. Okay, I've done 6. Now I'm going to be working with 7. So I'm going to fold along the line between G5 and G7. Making sure I'm folding that right along that line. There is some bulk in here, but don't worry about that. Just line up your ruler and trim that down to 1/4 of an inch. And now I'm going to place that. And I'm always placing my pattern piece the way it looks on here and the way it's going to go into the finished project. So I'm going to line that up, flip it over, and line up my cut edges. And now I'm going to stitch along that line right there. I've stitched along the line between G5 and G7. Fold that into the finished position. Here, take this off, put that back on, and just continue on. Okay, finger pressed in, over to the iron. And now the last step is just to trim away the excess fabric from the outside. Now remember, you're going to be trimming along the outer edge of that line. So just trim that away. There's quite a few layers there. Okay, our trimming is done, and there is our G1 or our G section completed. So what you will do is you will do the same for the H section, following exactly what we did for this side. I'm now going to be working on section F, and before I start that, I'm just going to show you what I've done. I was having problems seeing the line on my at a quarter ruler. So what I've done, I've taken some glow line tape, and it's just a transparent fluorescent tape, and it is used for highlighting on rulers. I've just taken a piece and run it across the back of my ruler just so it makes it easier when I go to butt that up, that I can see that my ruler is in the exact place. I have my F pieces all in order, so I'm going to start out by placing F1 into position behind F1. And remember, we want number 1 to be in the proper position with the wrong side facing up. Our first piece always, remember, goes wrong side up when we place it on the back of our pattern piece. So F1 is in there. I'm just going to make sure I've got that in the right spot. And it looks like I do, so I'm going to press that down with the iron, just pressing on the fabric. And that will hold it in place. I have a little Teflon pressing sheet, so I can press that down and it's not going to get stuck to my pressing mat. Okay, I'm going to fold it along the line between F1 and F2. Making sure that I get it right along that line. And now I'm going to take my add a quarter ruler and butt it up against there and trim away. I'm going to take F2 and put it into position. So it is going to go like this. I'm going to place right sides together and just stitch along that line. I've stitched along the line between F1 and F2. Okay, I've stitched F4 down. There is our candy. And it even looks more like a candy when you get it stitched together than it does on page 24 of the book. Okay, so hopefully you found this helpful, and I'll be back in the next video to work on more candies. Bye-bye for now.